Good evening, folks. My name's Jim Worthen. The show's Worthen One-on-One. Tonight I'm honored to have an old friend and former Lieutenant Governor of the state of California, Abel Maldonado. I want to do something before I introduce Abel, a little protocol. It irritates me even when the news media particularly, but and conservatives call him Obama. He's President Obama. He deserves the respect of the office. Same thing, it all started though back with George Bush when the liberal media and NBC wouldn't call him President Bush. They'd call him Bush. And I grew up when former office holders retained their title. My dear mentor and friend, Bob Lagomarsino, to me is still Congressman Lagomarsino. Ed Meese, former Attorney General. By the way, Attorney Generals are general. Governors are governors, and Lieutenant Governors are governors. And so I'd like to introduce old friend and acquaintance, Governor Abel Maldonado. Abel?
Jim, thank you so much for this interview. And you know what? Just call me Abel.
Oh, gee, how nice of you. Abel, every show starts out the same because this is less about politics than it is about you. Where were you born?
I was born actually in the 24th Congressional District. I was born in Santa Maria, there at Marion Hospital, so not too far from here.
Yeah, you still live there. And what did your parents do? Tell me about that background.
Well, my father, he came from another country. He came from Mexico. In those days, there was this thing called a bracero program where someone could come here on a temporary basis, and if you were a good temporary worker, they'd renew your permit so you can continue to work in America. And it came over in 1963 and 64 and 65 and met my mother. My mother is from New Mexico. But he met my mother in this little town called Pismo Beach. And there was a little dance there, Jim, and she didn't speak Spanish, and he didn't speak English, and then I was born. It was
amazing thing.
It's amazing what
a dance
love does,
do.
what a dance would do.
Yeah, it's amazing in these shows. Almost everybody that I interview, somebody, their friends or family, or I learn something about them that they didn't know when they think they know the person. I didn't know that about your mother.
Yes.
I assume that she also came from Mexico with your father.
She's from New Mexico, and still to this day we have a family farm. My dad started with a farmer in Santa Maria. His name was Jack Adam, and he had a brother named Dick Adam, and Dick is still working there on the farm. Jack has since passed away. Jack was a city council member in the city of Santa Maria. And Jack once said that my dad was one of the best workers he's ever had. Started working on that small farm and worked for them for almost, I think, over 20 years. And then started his own farm. And here I am. I mean, all these years later, here's a young immigrant, young whippersnapper who comes here on a temporary basis to work, to do agriculture work, and his son eventually becomes California's 47th Lieutenant Governor. It's a great story.
It is.
And it's a story that is important to me because, Jim, I'll tell you this, it's all been about opportunity. And the way I look at our federal government today, I see those opportunities kind of going away. It's just not the way it used to be. And one of the reasons I'm going to Congress is to change not the way it used to be, because there's always new ideas that are better for America, but to make sure that those opportunities are there. And it's been a great ride for our family.
Let's go back. So you're born there. Siblings, brothers,
Yes.
Sisters, how many?
Mother, father, get married. I'm born.
You were the firstborn.
I was the firstborn, and I have a brother who's also involved in the farm, and I also have a sister, and they actually happen to be twins. So something else you probably didn't know about my family. So Dad and Mom wanted to have 2 kids, and they had twins, so we had 3. But
so your mother said, wait, there still was 2 births, that's it.
Well, my mother comes from a big family. I think there was 9 or 10, and my dad comes from 10. So them coming to a different country, my father coming from a different country, knew that, you know, you can't support 10 people in this country, you have to work very, very hard. So they decided to tone it down a little bit and have two. But we had three. There's a brother and a sister, and a mother and father. And
where did you go to school?
I was actually was born in Santa Maria. Proud to be an American, Jim. I went to an elementary school. It was called Fairlawn. I was there, obviously, all the way through the 6th grade. And then I went to another junior high. It's called El Camino. El Camino is still there.
In Santa Maria.
In Santa Maria. And then from El Camino, I went to Santa Maria High School. Was very involved in FFA, was very involved in raising animals for the fair.
For those of you in Santa Barbara, FFA is Future Farmers of America.
That's correct. Great. Actually, they do have FFA groups here, but I don't see them as much as the northern part of the county. And I raised animals, and I was involved in ag mechanics, and I was involved in farm power. Farm power was driving a tractor. Since I was born on a ranch, I went to state finals, Jim, something else you might not know. And we have state finals, and the state finals is who's the best tractor drivers in the state. And believe it or not, that my last year, there was 3 of us. I still remember the names. There was a guy named Jeff Lumberg and a guy named Mark Casa. And we won 1, 2, 3. Mark was first, I think I was second, and then Jeff was third. And we won state champions, and we went back.
Tractor Olympics. You got the silver medal.
Oh, actually, you know what? We got the gold medal as a team because we won it as a team in California. So we get to go back to Kansas City to compete on a national basis. And we got smoked. I mean, we go back there and
we ran into all those Swedes from Minnesota.
We didn't know we didn't know what a combine was. We didn't know what a silo was. We didn't know any of that stuff. And here we're used to row crops, but that was the beginning of that. And I actually, in 1985, I had a grand champion hog at the Santa Barbara County Fair. And from there, that was obviously.
Do you remember who bought him?
Yes, I do. His name was Ron Burke and Bob Espinola, and they owned this farm called Gold Coast Farms in those days. And they
didn't buy him for butchering at a restaurant.
Actually, they bought him. It was a big donation to myself. Yeah. They knew my father because my dad worked with one of their partners who was Adams Farm. They had a lettuce thing going on. Adams grew lettuce. Gold Coast Packing kind of packed it for them, and they purchased my hog. I'll never forget it. And that was the beginning of paying for my college years. I went off to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I was a crop science major. I really wanted to be a plant doctor. And
you didn't even just want to be a farmer. You wanted to be
I wanted to be a
technician.
In those days, it was called a pest control advisor. But a plant doctor sounds a little bit better. I wanted to be a plant doctor where I could tell my family what to apply to a crop, what kind of medicine to give our plants when they're sick. And I did that, and eventually came out.
What year did you graduate?
That was, I was graduated from Santa Maria High School in 1985, and I attended Cal Poly. I didn't finish. I went for 3 years, came back to the farm and applied my techniques. And I can tell you this, Jim, I didn't become a plant doctor. I became a farmer myself with my father and with my mother.
Oh, wait, now you follow the same pattern as other college dropouts. You dropped out of college and you became lieutenant governor of the state of California. Well, there was a guy named Rush Limbaugh who became the greatest talk show entertainer. That was a guy named Bill Gates, and then Steve Jobs. You go down the list of people who, not that we're encouraging kids to drop out of school, but...
Well, I'd like to finish it. Let me tell you what happened to me. My father couldn't speak the language. He could, it was broken, but I came back and I was involved. I was commuting back and forth, and I think that was my biggest disappointment in my college years, is that I lived so close, Jim, that for 3 years I commuted every day.
You didn't get to be a frat rat.
I didn't get to live that college life that now most kids get to live, where you go study at the library, and then on Fridays and Saturdays you're having a great time. But I was going back and forth, and we kept that farm going, and that's how we grew the farm. And here I am.
So that would have been 88, 89.
That was 88, 89.
You're back doing.
I'm back doing the farm. Actually, I never left being the farm when I started. I started picking strawberries when I was 8 years old, and my dad would pick me up in the morning, and at 4:30 in the morning we would drive to the fields. We would harvest the crops. They would bring me back. around 6:45, take a quick shower, and sometimes didn't even shower, get on the bus and go to school. So I did the yellow bus thing my whole life because Mom and Dad didn't have time to drive me to school. So I was on the yellow bus going back and forth. In the evening after school.
You were on the big yellow bus, not the little
The big
one.
yellow bus. But this is important because it was a big part of me. I really wanted to play baseball, and I really wanted to play football, and I really wanted to play basketball, and my mom and my dad didn't let me because of the farm. My dad said, son, I don't have time to take you to school and to pick you up after practice, and neither does Mother. We're working day and night, just like typical farm worker families in the area. They work very, very hard. No attention to the kids when it comes to sports because they're trying to make a living. They're trying to feed the family and
build the future.
Build a future. And homework, my father didn't speak English, so homework was out of the question to help me. My mother tried to help me a little bit, but she'd come home at 4:35, 6 in the evening, didn't have time to teach anything. She was going to cook, go to bed, because tomorrow is another day. And those
4 o'clock comes real early.
4 o'clock comes real early. So
yeah, it's interesting, Abel, because one of the things you talked about in the wanting to move into the future, but also look back at some of the great things we're losing in this country. And one of them is kids don't work anymore. Now it's very difficult for a kid to get I started working at 12 as a farm worker. You don't know that about me. I picked cherries and cots during the summer in Hayward, California. And now it's very difficult for a kid to get a work permit at 13. They almost have to be 16, and by that time they're so into whatever they're doing in school that they just aren't getting the basics that we got.
Times are changed. Times have changed completely, Jim. In the olden days, I didn't have Twitter. I didn't have MySpace. I didn't have Facebook. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a beeper. We didn't have anything.
Now, do you have all those?
Well, I pretty much do, and so do my kids. And
you have
so
a
do
Twitter?
most kids. I have a Twitter account that I'm going to get fired up here pretty soon. I've been Twittering for a long time, but lately I haven't. I came back to the ranch after I left Sacramento. But yeah, it's new technology, and our kids are different. Now, if the internet goes down, the kids are upset. They're like, Dad, what are we going to do? The internet is down.
There's books, kid.
Yeah, or, we didn't have that not long ago. But those are the changes that have happened, I think, for the better. I mean, we all want a better future for our children, but I think our kids nowadays, Jim, are more like, you know what, give me this and give me that, and I'm entitled to this and I'm entitled to that. And it's not like it used to be. And I think in some areas for the betterment, but in some areas, our kids in our comfort, they forget about what real life used to be. And we forget about the good old days and the hard-working days. And you don't spend more than you receive, and accountability and trust and honesty. And I'm not saying that some kids don't have that today, but I'll tell you something. A good, honest day's worth of work in the olden days was hard work with your hands and your back. And nowadays, I think what's important is we need to educate our kids.
Abel, you then, somewhere in the early 90s, I think 93, you ran. What caused you to run for city council of the city of Santa Maria?
Well, it was 1993, Jim, where our business was growing, and
by this time you had your own farm.
We had our own farm.
Now,
the farm was
A
growing.
lot of people don't understand. Most farmers don't own their land. Most farmers lease land, and in the Santa Maria area, much of it's owned by big old trusts in San Francisco. Is that accurate?
Very, very accurate,
Yeah.
Jim. Good
And
history.
So, but the farmers then lease the land and make it profitable.
Well, in the olden days, Jim, you could lease a piece of property for 15 years, 10 years, and sometimes the property taxes were more expensive than the renting of a property, so people wouldn't go buy land, they'd just lease it. And like you said, big trusts have these lands. My dad, early on, we got lucky. I think how we got lucky was that we started to buy land early on in the process when land was actually affordable.
So you bought some when you were leasing.
And a lot of farmers still weren't buying. They were renting and leasing. They had these nice leases for 15, 10 years, so they wouldn't go buy. We started buying, and Dad was still working actually for the farmers at one point in time, and he was doing his little side thing on the side. And working hard, we started to own a little piece of property. We started to grow, and then Dad said one day to me, he says, you know what, in order for us to make it, we need to do everything. And I says, I don't understand. He says, we need to be vertically integrated. We have to farm it, we have to pack it, we have to cool it, and we have to sell it. And we noticed in the olden days as we were getting started
Olden
there,
days, 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
20 years ago, in the olden days, Jim. If you didn't do everything, you weren't making money, because everybody else you were farming out the processing, you were farming out the packaging, you were farming out the harvesting, you weren't making money. Everybody was taking a cut at the top. So we got vertically integrated, and I went down to get a permit to build a cooler, and I couldn't get a building permit. And it wasn't that the city was tough on me. It just happened that I was in the county, and it was going through LAFCO, through a sphere of influence. I was going to the city, and I got caught up in everything, and I said, you know what, I want to run for office. And I ran in 1994, and I became one of the youngest city council members in California, and I got elected to the city council.
Interesting. You probably know that the mayor of Carmel years ago.
I know him very well, and he's a good friend of mine.
Clint Eastwood got into politics the same way. He became mayor of Carmel because of a sign dispute on his bar that he had.
He had a restaurant called Hog's Breath Inn.
Yeah.
And he had a dispute on something. He says, darn it, I'm going to go there and give him hell, and I'm going to run for city council. And he became the mayor of Carmel.
Right.
And look at him now. I mean, doing well. And
so you ran.
I ran. I got elected. I ran against.
Shocked you, huh?
Actually, no. Actually, I knocked on a lot of doors, and those are the.
And you invested some of your own money.
I invested some of my own money, knocked on a lot of doors. And at the end we ran against an incumbent. Bob Orak was the incumbent, and that year there was 3 of us that got elected. I got elected. Joe Centeno got elected, and a gentleman by the name of Roger Bunch got elected, and. In those days, Tom Urbanski was on the city council, but he went to the Board of Supervisors, which caused a vacancy. In that vacancy, I appointed Bob Orak, the gentleman that I had defeated in the election, and I felt he had some experience, and here we are. I ran for mayor.
And then about 6 months later,
a year later,
you came to a Republican Central Committee meeting. And all of a sudden, you walked up to me, and you said, "Introduce yourself." And I hadn't heard of you. And I said, "Nice to meet you." And you said, "You've been elected to the city council." And you said, "Somebody told me that, Jim, you know Bob Lagomarsino, Ronald Reagan." And I said, "Well, yes, but much closer to Bob Lagomarsino." He said, "Well, that's great. They're my idols. They're my heroes." Mm-hmm. And could you introduce me to Bob Lagomarsino? And so I called Bob and told him, and we put together a little dinner, and Bob, Norma, and I, and you ate dinner in Los Olivos, and that started
I think it was Maddie's Tavern, I'm not sure, but somewhere in Los Olivos.
Yeah. And it started a support and friendship. You ran for mayor. We supported you. We're going to go back to your family, but I just want to go through my introduction to Abel Maldonado. Bob had lost his race in '92 for Congress. He'd been, the seat had been bought by a guy named Michael Huffington. And it was a terrible thing, but Bob still wanted to stay active. We started a newsletter, which I published, and we endorsed you in the newsletter. And then when you ran for the assembly, we endorsed you. And by the time you ran, I think maybe re-election, we endorsed you, but then Bob quit doing the newsletter. So that was my introduction to working with you. And I teased people. I said, Abel and I became not just political allies to a bit, but also kind of friends. And I'd come up and we'd go to a little restaurant near your headquarters out in Santa Maria, and One time I even borrowed $200 from you. I did pay you back, didn't I?
You did?
Oh,
You sure did, Jim.
There's so many people I forget. But let's backtrack. You're married. Mm-hmm. How many children?
We have 4 kids. We have, our youngest is 12 yesterday, going on 13, and my oldest is 22. And you just got to meet my daughter the other day.
You appointed your daughter as the alternate to
Yes.
the Republican Central Committee, and she is a delightful lady.
She's a great young lady.
In fact, some of us said we'd rather have you running than Abel, but that was another story.
You know what? Erica would do very well on the ballot.
She's been helping me quite a bit, but it's been a great ride for my family. Laura and I have worked very hard to raise our children. And our kids, my dad's always said, you harvest what you grow. Your kids are going to be what you want them to be. And it's been wonderful. And all I can say is that I can't believe how different 4 little minds can be when they're kids and how they're so different. But born and raised in Santa Maria, all my children. Laura was born and raised in Santa Maria. She went to Robert Bruce School in Santa Maria. She also went to El Camino Junior High and also went to Santa Maria High. And I knew her.
But you both speak English, so did you dance?
Oh no, we didn't go. I actually saw Laura to dance after high school, but we spoke English. It was a little different than Mom and Dad.
Yeah.
But it's been a great ride, Jim.
You were mayor of Santa Maria, and during your final years there, and I have had an objection to the naming of facilities after government officials. Until they die. And, Jack O'Connell Highway, for instance. But I think you really earned the naming of a facility in Santa Maria after you. During your last year as mayor, you worked incredibly to make Santa Maria an all-American city. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us briefly about that, and then tell us about the Abel Maldonado Community Center?
Well, when I first became mayor, I kind of ran on the platform that I was going to build a youth center and that I wanted to make Santa Maria an all-America city. And what did all-America city mean? Because people have said, well, Santa Maria is not an all-America city. Well, there is no perfect city in America, but there is a city where you bring everybody from all walks of life in one room, or you just bring them together as a community, and you do your darnest to make it the best place, a safe place with good quality education, and bringing people together. So I actually, what would happen, we applied. We had a couple council members, Jim, who said to me, Abel, why do you want to go through that process? Let's just do just do a resolution. They only choose 10 cities across America. Yeah. And in those days, this organization, the civic organization started by a senator from New Jersey named, I can't think of his name right now. He was a basketball player.
Oh, Bill Bradley.
Bill Bradley. Bill Bradley started the civic organization. Started giving, they give 10 cities across America. And when I got my award, the guy that gave me the award was actually the Vice President of the United States. On behalf of everybody in the city, his name was Al Gore. Mm-hmm. So we went to Washington, Vice President comes out, gives us our award. And let me tell you how we won it. It's a neat story. The competition was in Mobile, Alabama. And there was like 40 or 50 cities competing, but only 10 were going to get the nomination. So what I did is we loaded up a truck, and there was a couple of guys in Santa Maria and gals. We all got together, and we loaded some firewood.
Oh, no.
And we did Santa Maria-style barbecue in Mobile, Alabama. And we fed everybody in the convention. And we had our booth, and we took farm workers, we took African-American, we took Hispanic, we took every big cross-section of our city. And we had this booth, and we danced, and we told them about Santa Maria. And of course, I think that barbecue helped a little bit, Jim. But we got it on our first shot. We became an all-America city. It's just, community to uplift our community. And then obviously, we did the youth center. And I campaigned on it. I thought it was important. I'll tell you why, Jim. Everywhere I went within my city, young people would come up to me and say, Abel, there's nothing to do here. I said, well, what do you mean? Kiwanis is a key club. We have volunteer there's nothing to do. Would go to the next school, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to do. So I started thinking, we have a senior center, we have a veteran center, why not have a teen center? And I traveled across America, and mostly in California, and I saw a couple of centers that I liked. And in those days, the governor that was in place was Pete Wilson, and the senator was Jack O'Connell. And I went to Sacramento, and I says, guys, I want to build a teen center. And they kind of chuckled at me, and I said, well, what do you need? I asked Jack O'Connell, Jack, I need some resources to build a center. Can you help out? And he says, well, Abel, times are tough. In those days, the economy was a little tough. But there is a grant system we can apply, and Jack helped tremendously. So Jack and I, we asked the governor, we get our money, we bring it back. And of course, the first thing the city says is, how are we going to operate it? We can't do this, Abel. And I says, look, guys, the easiest thing to do is to do nothing. We're going to move forward, and we're going to build a center, and we're going to operate it. So we built it, we put it in place, and I'll tell you what's the hook that did it for me, Jim. I traveled to a little youth center in Duarte, California, and then I went to another youth center in Norwalk, California, and I'll tell you what did it for me. I went in and I watched, I looked at where these kids would check in and when these kids would check out. And some kids would check in at 7 in the morning and they would check out at 9 o'clock at night. And I said to myself, what would these kids be doing if they didn't have a youth center in their community? So we came back, we built it, and when I was gone in the legislature, the council decided to name it after myself, which was obviously an honor. I didn't need that, we didn't need that, but it is an honor. And I think
well deserved.
Well, Jim, I think the biggest hiccup has been that at nighttime, my phone number's been listed. I get calls, hey, what time's the center open? There's a dance going on, and it says, hey, what time's the dance start? But it's been great. The kids have loved it. And you know what's been beautiful, Jim? It's their center. It's the kids' center. No graffiti whatsoever. It's a beautiful facility.
You touched on something that most people don't know. There's studies of crime in our society. And if you ask people, when do you think the most criminal acts are committed in our cities? And most people would say, oh, bars get out, night burglars, it's got to be 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock at night. And no, it's 3, 4, and 5 o'clock in the afternoon when kids don't have a youth center to go to, when they have to find something to do, and it's usually mischief. And so you hit right on it. When you saw those kids that were there till 9 o'clock at night, they weren't out doing graffiti. They weren't out boosting something out of somebody's car just because they were teased by someone else. It's great.
And now, Jim, it's been a model. People from all over come to see what we've done in Santa Maria with our youth center. And you know what's the beauty about it for the kids? Guess how much we charge? $0. Santa Maria teenagers pay $0. And people ask me, well, you can't run it by charging $0. I said, you know what? A gang doesn't charge to be part of a gang. We're not going to be charged to be part of a community center here in Santa Maria.
That's great.
So it is a home run win-win all the way around.
You were elected to the Assembly. You and I began to drift apart a little bit then. You know, I think I'd run into you once in a while at state conventions, once in a while at functions, but there was a time in my life that I went 10 years without seeing Bob Lagomarsino, so watch out, we may get close again. You served 3 terms in the Assembly. You were term limited out, and you were a good representative for the area. What were some of the things you did in the Assembly? You were always in the minority, which has been, people don't realize, but there hasn't been a Republican majority in the state of California in the Assembly, I think, but for 2 years since 1958, and in the Senate, 8 months since 1958. And so you really had to, you couldn't get into the gigantic things because the Democrats controlled everything. So you had to deal with getting bills passed for people in your area. I remember when I was legislative aide to Lago, you know, we'd get bills from the county council, we'd get bills from the local chamber, from the local DA, from the local police, things that they needed to have put into law.
Sure.
So what kind of things did you do?
Well, when I first got to Sacramento, as you stated accurately, Jim, I was not in the majority party, so it was going to be difficult for me to get much done. In those days, if it was a big bill that was very important, the majority party would carry the bill. If it was a small district bill, they'd give you an opportunity to introduce it and to carry it. And I was very successful with a lot of district bills. One of the bills that I did was putting seatbelts in school buses. I've always said early on that, you know, we tell a child that they leave home, they got to put a seatbelt on in a car, they drive to the school bus, they get on a school bus and there's no seatbelts, and then we tell them to put a seatbelt back in the car, and you have to put a seatbelt on. So we did that. That was a bill that was important for me, for kids within our community, especially us in rural area where most of the kids are on the bus for a long time. One of the biggest bills that I did in Sacramento when I was in the legislature and the assembly was workers' compensation reform. Obviously, I think that was Arnold Schwarzenegger's biggest bill that he signed. And it was an interesting piece of legislation because people at the beginning says, well, Abel, why do you want to reform workers' compensation? I says, well, listen, we have a situation today where we have where some folks within the legal department, legal side of the business, are connecting themselves to the medical side, and they're causing problems, and they're in cahoots. They're charging too much, and the employer is paying, and the employer isn't able to give raises to employees, so we need to fix it. And bottom line, workers' comp was put in place for one reason and one reason only: to make sure there's good medical care for the employee if he or she is hurt on the job. And once they get that care, to get them back to work immediately so they can be productive. We passed the law. It was signed into law. I carried it in the Assembly. Senator Chuck Buchigan carried it in the Senate, and Governor Schwarzenegger signed it.
One of the things that a lot of people, and you probably saw this in your own business, back in the day, I think it was before this reform, we've had two workman's comp reforms. So the thing that just boggled my mind was that if you had a business, farmer, you have field workers, you have tractor drivers, you have packers, you have secretaries, bookkeepers. Workman's comp used to rate everybody in the business at the highest level. So a secretary was, you were paying workman's comp for her at a rate of a tractor driver that might get injured.
Yep.
Was that one of the things that
Yes, there were some changes in that toward the end on different, you were in different areas of your employment. Well, if you're a secretary, it was a lot less than somebody who had a knife and was cutting produce or so forth. But the biggest problem that we were having was that the costs were going so high that, and we had some folks that would turn a pinky into where the wrist hurt, then the elbow hurt, then the neck hurt, and before you know it, it was permanent disability, and the employer had to pay, and it's just the system was completely broken. It got to the point, Jim, where firefighters, we couldn't hire more firefighters because the fire department's comp was so high. We couldn't hire more police officers because comp was so high. We even got to the point where the Goodwill and the Salvation Army couldn't hire more people to go pick up free gifts from people or donations because of workers' comp. So we got it resolved, we fixed it, and those were obviously, that was a big bill for me. And at the end of the day, if you were a small family business owner and you got workers' compensation reform, you were able to make a little bit more money to give it to your employees or to grow your business, which I thought was huge.
You termed out.
I termed out.
And was there a break, or did you immediately, a Senate seat came open?
Actually, the Senate seat came open. In those days, we had the redistricting of 2000, the year 2000.
10 years ago.
If you recall, I thought I was going to run in a state Senate seat that Jack O'Connell had. It was the 18th senatorial district, which was San Luis Obispo. It was Santa Barbara, and then we had Ventura. And that's the seat that Jack was termed out. He was running for superintendent of public instruction. So I said, you know what, I might take a shot at the Senate seat. And then the redistricting came into place. And then that's where, if you recall what happened.
You ended up representing Santa Cruz.
I ended up representing Santa Cruz. I ended up representing Los Gatos, Montecito, Saratoga, Morgan Hill, little part of Gilroy, Carmel, Pebble Beach, and it was a district that was
And Santa Maria.
And Santa Maria, and Lompoc. So the district, Jim, was just so discombobulated. And then the congressional seat, if you recall in those days. We had a congressional district prior to the 2000 redistricting that had communities of interest. It was San Luis Obispo, it was Santa Barbara, and a little bit of Ventura. And then when the majority party redistricted it, they did what they called the ribbon of shame, which was just a little strip along the coast that during high tide, the district was underwater. Some of the district was underwater. And that was
Malibu to
it went from
San Simeon.
Malibu to up to the Monterey County line.
Yeah.
And it was really unfortunate because in those days we had politicians that were paying to choose the voters instead of the voters choosing the representatives. And that's why redistricting this year was so important, to give some districts that had communities of interest.
You served a full term in the Senate.
I served a full term in the Senate, and then I was...
That covered from...
I was there in 2000 to 2004. And then, actually no, I was there in 2004. I got elected in 98. I served 6 years. So in 2004
to 2008.
2008. And then I got reelected to the California State Senate in 2008. And then I only served 2 years. And that's when the governor nominated me to be the lieutenant governor.
Right. Now, in the Senate, you became kind of a, and I remember this part, in the first Bush election, you had just been elected to the Senate, and you were one of the speakers at the Republican National Convention.
I spoke in 2000, and I had the opportunity to give a big speech. I gave it all in Spanish. They had the guy named Secretary Andy Card called me and said, "Hey, would you speak at the convention?" I said yes, and I got to tell you that that was a highlight of my life. Obviously, I asked my father if he would come back to Philadelphia. The convention was at the Comcast Center in Philadelphia. I said, "Dad, would you come back?" He says, "Broccoli and cauliflower don't know that you have a convention in Philadelphia. I can't go back there. I'm staying here." But I called back, and I went out and gave a great speech. It was all in Spanish. The first time in the history of either convention that someone had given a speech all in Spanish. And obviously, it was a great time for my family, Jim. Something I will never ever forget. And it was just, it's amazing how a young man who grew up in Santa Maria, who was picking strawberries, who was moving sprinkler pipe, could eventually have an opportunity to speak to 16,000 people at a big convention. Was something that I will never forget.
8 or 10 million on TV.
And 8 or 10 million on TV.
You have it just struck me as we've gone through your resume that there's a tremendous similarity between you and Senator Rubio of Florida, as far as background, parents, work ethic, and being one of the young stars in the party. Do you see that?
I see myself as a day-to-day person who's been in office, who has always never forgotten where he's come from. I've never forgotten the fields of California. I've never forgotten who put me in office, and that's the people of my district. And that's who I'm beholden to. It's to the people who put me in office, the people of my district. And the one thing that I think has been very important in my guiding life is that I've never forgotten whose money government spends. It's the people's money. It's not the politicians' money. And that's a beef that I have with Washington today, Jim, because they've spent so much that the debt is on me. The debt is on you. The debt is on my kids. The debt is on our children. And we didn't necessarily want to spend that kind of money. My kids don't want to have that kind of debt, but yet Washington, the politicians in Washington are so broken that they've just spent and spent and spent, and they continue to spend and spend and spend, and deep down, we're broke.
I'm going to get into the elephant in the room, as they say, and why your association with Governor Schwarzenegger and many conservatives and many Republicans consider him worse than a rhino. Rhino being Republican in name only. They consider that maybe he never was, that he was a Kennedy.
Well, the choice was Arnold Schwarzenegger or Phil Angelides,
Yeah.
and I think it was a hands down. I mean, the governor did sign my workers' compensation bill, and I was very happy with that.
And in the first 2 years of his term, he governed as a conservative, but then he got his head knocked around in some referendums, and he became just terrified of the embarrassment of losing, and conservatives lose from time to time. You then, and I'll be honest with you, we came a couple of years ago, you were a state senator, and it required a 2/3 vote in both houses to pass tax increases. And it required 2 senators and I think 3 assemblymen to cross over from the Republican Party to pass them. And you made some enemies because...
Actually, there was 4 senators and 6 assembly members.
Okay. And you became the last one they got. They had 3 before you, and they had the 6 assemblymen. And I can remember the day afterwards, Abel saying, recall all of them. Recall those sons of bitches, including my friend Abel Maldonado. I'll sign the petition, because we were so angry about the tax increase. How do you feel about it now?
Well, let me set the context of how it happened.
Okay.
You know, the easiest thing for me would have been to vote no and let California go off the cliff. And this is the choice that we had at the time. California in those days, in 2009, had a $62 billion budget deficit. The legislature came together early on, and they cut $20 billion early on, which left us down to about it was $41 billion deficit, Jim. And I gotta tell you, that the hardest vote that I've ever had to cast in my life has been the budget vote of 2009. Because I stood up on that House floor that day and I said, this might be the end of Abel Maldonado, but it's not going to be the end of the state of California. And what had happened in those days was that we had a $41 billion budget deficit. And for the first time in the history of California, Jim, we were sending California taxpayers IOUs as their tax refund. We were on the verge of shutting down construction projects throughout the state of California. We were on the verge of shutting down some, not high schools and not elementaries, but some community colleges were going to be devastated. And at that time, we felt that that was a very important part of people that didn't have jobs. And I can go on and on and on. Times were tough. And I said to myself, you know what? I was not raised to not pay my bills. And we were not paying our bills. There was a lot of people that weren't getting paid. And I said to myself, I was not raised to bankrupt a company. And California was on the verge of bankruptcy. And I went out there and I said, you know what? We need some reforms. We need to cut some gas tax. We need to put single sales factor. And we need to make some reforms if I'm going to be voting on this budget. Now, let's not forget, the leader of the California State Senate on the Republican side had already said, I'm voting for it. The leader of the Republicans on the Assembly side had already said, I'm voting for it. And it was down to...
They were in the committee of 5.
They were in the committee of 5.
You weren't.
The leaders of both parties. Yeah. I was not. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. And then at the end, Jim, as I stated, I said to myself, you know what? The people of California don't want us to hold them hostage. I was elected to govern. And you know what? If I go back to my district and the voters say, no more of Abel Maldonado because he voted for this budget that had a sales tax increase, then I was prepared to pack up my bag and I was prepared to pack up and go back to picking strawberries and go back to working on the fields. And that's a commitment that I made to myself. And I said that if people want someone that's prepared to govern, if people want someone that's ready to make the tough decisions, not easy ones, and if people want someone, they would give you an opportunity to serve them again. And that's how it happened, Jim. And I didn't do cartwheels. It's probably the hardest vote I've ever cast in my life. But it was one that we had to take at the time. One thing at the end that I need to explain to the voters too is that those taxes were temporary. They were only for 18 months. Those taxes are gone. They're not in place anymore.
Do you support reinstating them?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I've made that very clear because not long after that, we went to the ballot. And obviously the voters said loud and clear, no mas tax increases here. It's time to do your job and it's time to cut government. So while they were temporary and they're gone, I'm not running for office to raise taxes on the people of California. We did it when we had to. Now they're talking about taxes on a statewide basis, and the deficit is $8 billion. We were talking $60 billion in 2009. When I casted the vote, it was 41. So it was a hard vote, and I stand before the voters today, and if they want to hold that vote against me forever, then I'm sure they're not going to vote for me. But I'm telling the voters, we had to govern. I made a tough call, I made a tough decision, and I governed. And that's what's lacking in Washington today.
Question. First, I want to clarify something for the viewers. California, you're supposed to balance the budget, and there's been games played, but the dollar for dollar, the real expenditures in California, the budget is down dramatically over the last few years. We're not spending more money. It's quite a difference in Washington, and we'll get to that, because the people of California can't borrow trillions of dollars. They can't even borrow billions. They can play a little game, and that we've all objected to that, you know, but it is a different type of budgeting than you will face in Washington. The two possibilities that people voice: your vote was bought by being promised you'd be lieutenant governor. The timing isn't right for that because it wasn't open.
You know, there's people, Jim, that will go, well, let me backtrack just 1 second here. Prior to that budget vote, I had a 100% voting record with the chamber, my local chambers. I had a 100% voting record with all the Cal Tax and the tax groups. So
you had a conservative voting record.
I've had a conservative, fiscally responsible voting record until that vote came out. And then obviously people have said, well, Abel did this for the lieutenant governor's office. When I voted for the budget, John Garamendi was still the lieutenant governor of California.
And he hadn't ran for...
And there was no open seat for John Garamendi. It just so happened that...
Now, you did make a deal, though.
What was the deal?
My understanding is that our new form of election was your idea.
Well, it wasn't a deal. It was an agreement.
Okay.
It was an agreement.
Yeah.
And the first agreement
you
was...
You got to get support for this new open primary.
The first agreement was $1.2 billion of single sales factor that would keep Cisco, that would keep Apple, that would keep HP, that would keep all the high-tech companies in the Silicon Valley. That was number one. Number two, $2 billion in reductions of a gas tax. That was number two. The governor had stated they were going to raise the taxes, and it was already in the budget. Actually, the other people that had negotiated the budget had agreed to a $2 billion. The other Republicans had agreed to a $2 billion gas tax increase. I said, no way. I would never go to a gas tax increase because that hits people at home immediately, and that's bread off the table. Number three, I wanted no pay increases to politicians when times are tough. No budget, no pay the politicians. And the last but not least was the open primary. I really felt at the time, and I still feel today, that we have 3.7 million independents and declined estates in California that could never voice their opinion in a primary election. And I felt that it was important that their voice was heard, that declined estates and independents could vote. Under the old system, they had to ask somebody for a ballot. So if I was a declined estate and independent, Jim, I'd have to go ask the Republican Party for a ballot. And at one point in time, the Republican Party said, nope, we don't want them participating in our electorate. And I said to myself, for the life of me, how could we cut 20% of the market share out of our election process? Let's let declined estates and independents vote. So the open primary...
So you thought that was good for the Republican Party?
Well, I thought it was bad that they didn't allow them to vote. in a primary election because declined estates and independents should have a voice. And declined estates had to actually go ask for permission to Democrats too. And this is the way I look at it. If you are a voter in America and if you're a voter in California, then you ought to have the right to participate in any election.
We're having so much fun, time flies. Let's skip. So there was an agreement, typical good politics. You don't give up things without getting things. So I understand that. So I think we've put to bed the two, if you will, that Abel was bought, because I never believed that of you. I think you put to bed a little bit of the fear that he's really a liberal Democrat, not a Republican, in your voting record, other than that one key vote. I'll accept your explanation. Now we're talking about the federal government. What do you see as the key #1 issue in your race and in the service in Congress?
Jim, the first way to get out of a hole is by you stop digging. The politicians in Congress today need to stop spending so much money. You can't bring in one amount of money and spend 40% more and borrow it from other countries. That is that's the quickest issue. That's the quickest thing we can do to get our economy moving. Stop the spending and start creating jobs. Look at the corporate rate, because we all compete on a global basis, and eliminate some of these regulations that have put a strong hold on small family businesses. We got to grow this economy. And in Washington today, we have a group of politicians who are in Congress who can't come together on anything, and they've held us hostage, and we're going down the wrong path. And this election that we have coming up is pretty simple, Jim. If you want what you have in Washington today, you can continue to vote with what we have. Or if you want to change and you want someone to go back there and give them hell and fight for the people of our area, I hope they would give me an opportunity, because this spending has to stop, #1. #2, we need elected officials in Congress today who are willing to make the tough choices, Jim. The ones that you can see, you know what, stop focusing on your re-election and start focusing on what needs to happen back there. Because the politicians back there, all the politicians back there, Jim, they're more worried about their election, they're more worried about what's going to happen than, let's get people who are willing to make the tough choices. I have demonstrated that I can make a tough choice. Let's move forward.
You wouldn't be for increasing the deficits?
Absolutely not. I think right now we need to be for creating jobs so we can get more taxpayers. Help a small family business. I had a small family business owner ask me the other day, Abel, what can I do to help the economy? I said, grow your business. Make some more money so you can hire more people. And when you hire more people, we'll have more taxpayers. We need to stop the spending. We can't continue to, I mean, $14 trillion in debt? Really, Jim? $126,000 for every taxpayer in America?
One of the big problems in the federal budgeting is baseline budgeting. When they talk in Washington about cutting spending, they are only talking about cutting growth.
Right.
They never look at, say, here's like in California when you had that big deficit, you had to look at what the budget was and how short you were in revenue. The best program I've seen to cut the deficit is Connie Mack's 1 cent proposal. You understand that?
I've looked at it. I've actually, before Connie Mack came out with his proposal, I said, why can't we approve the budget that we passed in 2009?
Free spending.
Yeah, free spending. And if there's going to be an increase from 2009, put it on Social Security and Medicare to help our older generation that we made a commitment to them. You cover them, go back and pass the budget that we passed a couple of years ago, and we can start over again. But Jim, you're right. I mean, when politicians say we're the one to cut government, they say, well, they're going to cut 2% of an 8% growth.
Yeah, that's a baseline now, 8%.
Yes. So
even Connie Mack, who said, well, free spending now and cut 1% a year, acknowledged that it would take to 6 years to wipe out the deficit. In other words, we continue to have deficits for 6 years.
Well, look at the budget they just passed. Well, no. I'm sorry. Look at the budget they just introduced.
Yeah.
It's not going to be voted on, but it's a political document. Once again, politicians in Washington doing the political two-step to get reelected. We want people. I mean, let's send people.
I'm going to ask you a tough question.
Ask me a tough question.
That no one's asked you. I'll guarantee you. You can tell me if I'm wrong. From what I'm hearing of you, obviously, you have a opponent, Chris Mitchum, a nice guy who ran for the Assembly and almost won. He is a Tea Party favorite. The Tea Party people, from what I've heard, you're more focused on running against Lois Capps than against Mitchum. Is that accurate?
It's very accurate. I think Lois Capps will be my opponent, and the race is going to be very, very clear. If you want $15 trillion in debt, if you want $126,000 of debt per taxpayer, if you want $46,000 in debt for every man, woman, and child, and if you want to lose your America's credit rating, and you want stimulus, and you want bailouts, then you can keep Congresswoman Lois Capps there.
I have a tough question for you, because what I hear, you would be a perfect, what you're saying, you would be a perfect person to, if you get elected, will you join the Tea Party caucus?
Haven't thought of that one. That's a good question, but
I mean, everything you're saying is what they're for.
Well, Jim, put it this way: when I'm elected, I'm going to go back to Washington, and every caucus that believes in what I just talked about, I'm going to look at being a member of.
You probably should talk to Michelle Bachmann, see if she's ready to have you, because she wants people who.
I'll tell you one caucus that I'm really going to be in. The 24th Congressional District Caucus. That's the caucus that I'm going to represent. That's the people of this district. And that I'm going to fight like heck, Jim, to make sure that we get our fair share, great representation, and one that's going to create jobs for the people of this area. I mean, UCSB, Cal Poly, Cuesta, Santa Barbara City College, there's a lot of kids leaving there. They want a job. And we got to eliminate these regulations and on these small family businesses that they're trying to strive here. I mean, this is an incubator of small family businesses. Why can't we help them first?
We've got about a minute left. A couple of questions. Are government bureaucrats overpaid or underpaid?
I think that over the years, the government bureaucrats have had some very sweet deals when it comes to pay. Because in the olden days, they didn't get paid too much, but the government had a nice pension and a good retirement for them. Now, over the years, it's a little bit of both. So I think we have some hardworking state employees, hardworking federal employees, but when they're getting paid more than the private sector, I think we need to look at balance.
Abel, we're out of time. I really appreciate it, and it's been great time for me.
Time did fly by here,
It
Jim.
did.
Thank you so much.